Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar, Unleash the Untapped Power of Email Address Intelligence, presented by AtData and Martech. Before we begin, just a few viewing tips. If you have any audio issues, click the audio icon on your screen to enable it. You can use the Q&A section to communicate with us if you're having any viewing issues. You can also use the Q&A to send questions directly to the speakers about their presentation at any time. If we don't get to your question, we will be sure to pass it along to AtData. Joining us today are Brian Cardona, President of AtData, and John Miller, Chief Evangelist of Demandbase. Thank you both so much for joining us today. Brian, I'll turn things over to you.
Thanks, Cynthia. Hey, everyone, I'm Brian, and thanks again to all of you for being here today as we talk email address intelligence. It's great to be with you. So I've been working in the email data space for almost my entire career, over 20 years, starting with Ziff Davis Publishing, where we sent our weekly tip emails with an ISP rather than the ESPs like MailChimp because they didn't exist yet. And for the last 15 years, I've been a member of the leadership team at AtData. AtData is a combination of fresh address and tower data. We have over 20 years of history, and we are the email address experts. Over the course of my career here, I've had the privilege of working with hundreds of brands on their email strategy, primarily as it relates to data quality, identity, and more recently, risk. So today, I'm excited to talk to you about email address intelligence and how investing in it can drive the growth of your business. John?
Thanks, Brian. Thank you, everyone. Hi, great to connect and excited to be able to join and talk with everyone today. So I've been in marketing technology for almost my entire career, perhaps best known as the co-founder and the first chief marketing officer at Marketo, which is a B2B marketing automation platform that was sold to Adobe for $4.8 billion. After Marketo, I founded an ABM platform called Engagio, which we sold to Demandbase a couple of years ago, and that's sort of how I got to where I am today. Way back in my career, I worked in the B2C side of things at a company called Epiphany, where that was also an early email solution, focusing primarily on financial services, insurance, and telecommunications. So last but not least, I am on the board of AtData and really excited to be involved with the company. So thank you very much, and let's get into it. So, I guess I just really wanted to start by level setting, why email intelligence is so important. And as we all know, we're living in a world that is just being overwhelmed by data. 2023, we're expected to create over 100 zettabytes of data worldwide, for the first time. That's a 24% increase, over last year, and it's just growing. So this isn't a question of, is there data out there? It's a question of how well are we using that data and turning it into intelligence to have better relationships with our customers. And on the next slide, and I think as we'll see from today, we believe that, the email is perhaps one of the most important things, the important attributes for turning all that data, into intelligence. Now, there's been a lot of discussion about, is email dead, the death of email, all that kind of stuff. I just posted on LinkedIn yesterday that, Intuit MailChimp has a really cool exhibit running in London called the Email is Dead exhibit, where dead is crossed out. And it's really does a great example of showing how email is just a necessary and vibrant part of our lives, every single day. Not the least of which is because the email address is the unique identifier that we have online, and that kind of ties our identity together. And I think, we're going to see how that lets us use that to be more intelligent with our customers. Brian?
Yep, great. Yeah, and I love that MailChimp exhibit, super cool. And I love what Ben Chestnut, the founder of MailChimp, said years ago on that same topic, right? Is email dead? And especially in the advent of social media and young people. And he responded to that question saying that he thinks the E in email stands for employed, right? So when we hear about, kids are using TikTok and the other things, true, but as they move into adulthood, right, we know everyone's still using that email address as the key identifier. And so, just digging further into that, why on email intelligence, email is at the foundation of the internet, right? It remains arguably the most agnostic technology we use every day. Contrary to the walled gardens, no one person owns SMTP or the RFCs that govern email. We think that's awesome, right? It makes it worthy of our investment. It's not going anywhere, and nobody can change the rules around it, a single person or single entity. And today, we're not just going to talk about the inbox or spam folders and simply email marketing. Those are parts of the whole, but we're going to talk about all the data surrounding the email address, the identity, activity, and behaviors, and what we can do with that data. So email address intelligence, simply, it's understanding the person behind the email address, answering who are they? Are they real? Who claims to own this address? Right? And I love this slide, and props to Damien on our marketing team and his team to show, right, how the email address is at the center. And so, right, so how do people typically engage with their email address? What historical behavior do we have around that email? Is it persistent, one that's used a lot, or is it one that's rarely used? Like maybe you have a fantasy football account and you log into Yahoo for that, and that's the end of it. And what are preferences in terms of services and general interest for that email address? And then going beyond the individual, we'll talk about household view as well. And just again, looking at that email address holistically, how can that intelligence drive our business forward and prepare us for this trend of more and more data?
Yeah, I mean, it's so essential to sort of, use all this data and use the email to tie it to a specific person and the intelligence about them, because customers are demanding more. Digital is such an interesting double-edged sword, because on the one hand, it creates all these great new ways that we can interact with our customers. But on the other hand, it raises the consumer expectations for how we're going to be managing them. They expect that when they come to our website or log in, that we know who they are. They remember who we are. They expect that we know if they're real or if they're a bot, or that they're not a bot, I guess, specifically, and that they are who they are, not an impersonator pretending to be them. And all the things Brian just talked about using the email address to sort of understand that is how we deliver on those expectations. And this is only going to get worse, or the bar is only going to be raised with things like AI and the metaverse. So all of this together is what leads to the significance of email address intelligence, because that email address is that thread that we are going to use to tie the consumer across all the different channels that are interacting with us to be more relevant and intelligent.
Yep. And so to help us kind of get our arms around it, we're breaking it into 4 groups. First, improving data integrity, then marketing performance, then mitigating risk and fraud, and identifying activity. So we'll start with the validation for improved data integrity, as this lays a foundation for everything built from it, right? So our marketing efforts, sales and ROI analysis, product development, machine learning, AI, the saying, garbage in, garbage out, right? It's very important that we have strong data integrity. And the cost of inaccurate data is well documented. According to Internet Retailer, marketers reported wasting 21% of their marketing budget because of bad data. And that can impact things in a lot of ways. One easy example is consider a marketing campaign, a broad television marketing campaign, and all the money and time and effort spent on brand awareness and driving traffic to websites. And then as they arrive on the website at that moment, to finally make that conversion and provide you data, it's inaccurate data that's entered. And that's an obvious, easy place for email address intelligence to step in and help you improve. And then there's outdated data, right? So Google has this new inactive policy. Probably some of you heard about it a few months ago. Google stated that they're going to delete inactive accounts that have been active for 2 years. Their definition of inactive is not necessarily related just to Gmail and the inbox. It also can include things like YouTube and so on. So it's interesting in their scope, but the reason for doing that is to help maintain data integrity and eventually hope prevent account takeover. But think about what that means to your business, right? So Gmail has an estimated 1 billion active users. So you could argue 20% of the world's population is using Google's mail service. We're sure it's a big part of your database, right? And so what does it mean to your database, this new policy? And what do you need to know to make a good decision about what to do with those Gmails where maybe you haven't seen activity over the last year or two? And then in the context of merging data, right? And if you're using clean rooms and CDPs, are you using hashed emails there? And data integrity, how important is it that your data is syntactically correct so that when you create that hash, you can have the best match rates and the most effectiveness within your CDP. And then lastly, this one's a little bit of a one-off, but I think it got the attention of everyone here at Data when the news came out, and it's a really interesting one, and that's about Frank. Frank, it was a college tuition fintech startup, and they were acquired by JP Morgan Chase a couple years ago, I think, and they paid maybe, I think they reported $175 million to buy it. And the purchase, right, it's a startup. So the purchase and the value is in part predicated on the growth of the business and the potential of the business. And so it was stated that they had 4 million accounts, right? So come to find out is after, I believe, the acquisition, JP Morgan dug in, they found that the vast majority of those accounts were fake. Created email addresses by bad actors under the guidance of the CEO. So obviously, we're probably talking about a crime here, but more importantly is, right, with the better due diligence, JP Morgan would have identified that, but also, right, what is the when you look at the value of your business and you think about things like revenue and EBITDA and the importance of growth within those things, overall, that data is an important asset to your business, your first party data. So we think, again, the data integrity, and it's worthy to invest in that data as you look at it as an overall asset for your business.
I love that example of Frank, because so often I think of email validation as just make sure you don't have undeliverable emails that like mess you up for the spam bots, but there are a lot of other really cool use cases as well. So the second use case that we wanted to talk about is, using the email address intelligence to enrich what you know about the customer so that you can make your campaigns more intelligent across kind of all the different kind of interactions you have across the customer journey. So, really, I think there's kind of two buckets of this here. One version of it is enriched to just get more data for more personalization. And then second is enriched so you can use the email address, to kind of tie that customer's interactions across kind of new channels like Facebook, custom audiences, and things like that. And you get that consistency. So different ways you can think about enriching, in many ways, this started a long time ago when catalog companies had postal addresses for consumers, but they didn't have email addresses. So that's one way of enriching, is like, hey, here's the email address, or the reverse, right? I have an e-commerce company that emails my customers, but I want to send out a catalog. So how do I kind of, add in their postal address? And then the third one is, bringing in that kind of demographic information around, how old are they, where do they live, gender, and that kind of stuff can be useful. I heard an interesting story from the ad data team, about, someone who came in and oh gosh, I'm not going to get the details exactly right, but bought kind of, something that was, clearly, would indicate, a female gender based on the purchase, but the actual, appending says that, this was, a man, and they were able to sort of say, okay, this was clearly bought as a gift. But if they hadn't done that, I'll think about how bad the segmentation kind of might have gone. Brian, you're nodding, so tell me if I screwed up.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, so often that's the case, and I think the demographic data is going to help clear that picture up for them.
Yep. And so again, it's about being smart with that customer. Just a couple of more advanced things you can do. One is start to use this data to roll up not just individual emails, but roll up to the account level or the household level for B2C, or the account level, for B2B. That householding is important to bring in new channels like connected TV. Another use case that we've seen customers use is there's so many different systems out there, with the average company having 290 different, apps in their stack. There might be, the same person might have different email address identifiers as the key in different systems. But by doing this proper enriching, you can actually say, no, that's all the same person, and do a better job of unifying that first party data to kind of be more intelligent. And that lets you start then augmenting your profiles, not just with who they are, but what they've done and their behaviors. And that ends up being gold when put into machine learning models to start to actually kind of predict, in market buying, engagement, things like that. So it's really all sorts of cool use cases you can do when you start, complementing that email address with all this intelligence.
Yeah, and it's a lot has changed again. John, as you spoke, when we think about email append historically, it was, hey, I need to grow my email database to expand the reach of my, monthly or weekly or a couple times a week emails. And it's way more than that now, right? We're looking at connecting the disparate databases and understanding the household. It doesn't mean that you're going to mail to the email address when you append it. It does mean that you're going to get smarter about who your customers are and be better able to target and understand them. So let's look at fraud as a next application of the email address intelligence. There's 75% of companies experiencing an increase in email-based threats, right? We know this is a vector because of, again, the prominence of the email address. So a ton of advancements here over the last few years around fraud prevention. The email address intelligence at @data allows us to verify identity for new account creations, prevent account takeovers, and reduce chargebacks for our clients. It said that 40% of fraud as it relates to email is done with a new email address. So new means it was just created, right? It hasn't been seen before. And so with a simple risk score derived from an email address and supporting data like IP address, name and postal, or other metadata, we can have a huge impact on fraud prevention. And email address intelligence in this context helps us answer questions like, does this email address and name postal pair look familiar? Do they belong together? Or does the email address being presented look correct from a geographic standpoint, right? For example, we might always see Josh Allen at Gmail in Buffalo or California. Why is it presenting from Russia today? So email address tumbling, another important piece. Those of you that use Gmail may know that Google allows you to use the plus sign alongside your email address to create an infinite number of emails, right? So bots know this and they take advantage of it. Fraudman +1, Fraudman +2, and so on. So with access to a broad network of data, not just your own, you're able to stay protected, and we can tumble that data down to the root email address, right? Where does all this data resolve? They're throwing a bunch of plus signs, maybe 1,000 different iterations. I think this slide shows a little bit of that kind of underneath the one graphic. And then domain risk, right? Here's another piece related to the email address. What is this domain? Have we seen it before? When was the first time we saw it? Maybe we saw it 10 years ago, but just once. And then suddenly we're seeing 1,000 new emails over the course of 10 minutes, right? So something's going on here. With email address intelligence, the activity can be immediately identified. We can update the dispositions and update the scores, and again, protect the businesses from a potential attack. In fact, our data scientists have recently identified a 100% increase in the use of disposable domains over the past 12 months. So we're asking, what's going on here? Why is that? Who's using these disposable domains? Those that don't know, disposable domains are often used when you want to just throw an email at a sign up and never look at it again, but they're great vectors, again, for the bad actors. And then, this can all be powered by a vast historical database, or is powered by that, covering almost 99% of the US market and 90% for Europe, APAC, and LATAM. We can determine if an email is to be trusted, warrants more scrutiny, or rejected, all in less than a second. And this broad network of this activity and machine learning is helping us with better decision making. So in the context of fraud, in some cases, we know a business is going to have a broad fraud team of expertise. We know this email address can layer into their efforts. Or if you're running lean, maybe a smaller e-commerce shop, we know that risk score gives you an easy way to determine, hey, does this email address look good? Or maybe it requires additional scrutiny.
Yeah, so the fourth use case that we really want to talk about is kind of re-engaging customers. And kind of, I want to share kind of a couple kind of use cases for it. The first is, what if a customer comes to your site and purchases but uses guest checkout? Apparently, 43% of consumers prefer using guest checkout, and 72% will still use it even if they have an account, according to Forbes. So you want to make sure that you can capture some information about them, even if it goes through guest checkout, which you can do. Again, at least you get the email, you can kind of connect it to additional information. A more subtle one is abandoned cart. And in this case, the person, came to your website, maybe they never even entered their email address. Is that information just gone and lost for you forever? Well, at least, in the US, you can actually kind of say, no, I know who that person was from their cookie, and tie that to an email, and then use that to kind of, go and re-engage with the lost cart kind of process. The other example of re-engagement is, maybe you have a customer that, used to be a really good customer, and they've purchased multiple times from you, but then maybe they haven't responded to your emails or purchased in a while. Well, it could very well be that that email address that they had is no longer their primary email. They are using a different email address now. That happens all the time. And so another form of email address intelligence is what we call email change of address. And we can just say, hey, you have this email for that person. That's not the valid email anymore. This one is. And by having that intelligence, you can go potentially reactivate what otherwise would have been a really good customer. And when you can combine, the third key piece of this reengage is to when you can bring in other information about activity signals related to that email. This can be as simple as, with our intelligence, we know, well, this email address is opening and clicking on emails sent from other vendors, which means this person is an active buyer. And you can use that to say, yep, that's more likely to be kind of one that's going to be a good responder to my campaigns, versus an email address that doesn't really ever seem to engage or click on emails from anybody. That's going to be less good. And ultimately, you can use that to help find in-market opportunities. So yeah, those are the four main use cases of email address intelligence. It's both validation. It's to sort of make sure you're right. It's enriching the data to be more relevant. It's protection against fraud. And then it's re-engagement of the customers. So now, Brian, I want to talk about, well, how do we actually do this? We get it. All right, sounds good. Where are we going to begin? Okay. And I want to begin by sort of, really start talking about, just how do you collect the data? And in particular, kind of that first party data that you're collecting. It starts with, making sure that you are collecting the email. There's a lot of forums out there that just use, ask for the email, which I actually think is a really good, interesting best practice, because the fewer fields you have on your forms, the more likely you are to kind of get a good conversion. According to a company called WP Forms, they found that if you ask for information like a phone number, that's going to reduce your conversion rate by 15%. For what it's worth, I ran an A/B test on this exact same thing back at my time at Marketo. I found that phone number reduced my conversion rate by 50%. So maybe that's, then that's a B2B example. So point one is, the fewer fields you can ask for, if just getting email, and then validating that as an accurate email, the higher conversion rate, and potentially the more accurate information you're going to get, because you can then augment that with other information that's proven to be accurate. The second point here is a little more subtle, which is in terms of collecting your data, a lot of companies will tend to overwrite data that they know with new data that comes in. But it turns out there's actually interesting value to be had in knowing the history and the fact that it changed. Something that knowing that sort of this email address used to have a certain level of activity and now has this level of activity, that can indicate a lifestyle change that might, impact how they respond to kind of specific products. Or it can indicate that they're sort of more or less likely to respond over a specific channel. So we encourage to, collect the data in an intelligent way, but then also keep your history so that you can kind of understand how those activity levels fluctuate over time. And lastly, not on the slide, make sure you're doing this all in a privacy compliant way and that you're tracking all the local regulations.
Yeah, exactly. That's becoming more and more of an important thing is with the advent of the state legislation here in the U.S. and then maybe potentially a federal law. We know about the happenings in California too. So, of course, staying on top of that is super important. Next up, in terms of how cleansing, hygiene, validation, this one I think a lot of us are familiar with. But let's talk about the importance of it and how to get it done. According to Statista, 10% of email addresses collected are inaccurate because of human error. And, obviously we can say right across our clients, we see a wide range, maybe 5 to 7% on the low side, but then over 20% for folks with the mobile apps. For example, we have a quick service restaurant client that has millions of app downloads monthly. And with the app download, there's incentive, right? Get a free item, download the app and get a free item. They're 20% invalid rates at times. And I think, right, you consider the negative impact that could have on their business if left unchecked. It's a no-brainer there to add validation. So how do you add validation? Right, we have single call API, list API, automated FTP, or project-based work. It's super easy. Those of you that know at data know safe to send, right? That's our version of validation. We think it's the best, of course. But it's an obvious, easy investment for your business. And what's interesting about it, right? It's not one size fits all. When we look at validation, we need to understand the context. Is the data being collected at a brick and mortar level in real time, human to human? Or is it being collected in a shopping cart with $5,000 worth of items in the cart, right? How do we want to apply the results of validation or potentially the risk score as well? And we're here to help businesses understand the best approach in each of those instances. And two, as it comes to applying it, it's important to know that legacy validation was driven by SMTP, right? If we think of how does email validation work, we're not going to get into those weeds today, but primarily that mailbox ping, right? SMTP. But modern verification, we're complementing that SMTP with digital signals. Right, we're looking at the whole ecosystem as we've been discussing today and layering that into validation so that we're getting more accurate results. In addition, around quality and understanding that data, we have engagement score, right? Maybe this email never opens. What's going on with this email address? And maybe it hasn't opened for you, but it's open for others, as John mentioned earlier. Or maybe we've seen it super frequently across the network for the past 30 days and associated with high value e-commerce transactions. And on the other hand, maybe we haven't seen it and there's been no activity with it. And so using this data and applying it in your marketing campaigns to tell you, right, email one that is super active and purchasing over the last few weeks, let's get after it. Email two, maybe we take a little bit of a more conservative conversion approach. Right? So as you think about these things, and we suggest you consider an advanced approach to cleaning, right? That's got traditional methods and then the modern techniques that's including all of these additional signals. Next one.
That's really, focusing on kind of the data, kind of what you're cleaning it at capture and then validating and things like that. But then, as we talked about, we think it's really important to then, start appending and optimizing the data with kind of information that exists outside. So obviously, to reiterate, follow your privacy regulations in terms of doing this. One of the things that we think is the most important here is identity resolution. The ability to sort of, take, what might be seen as multiple email addresses across multiple systems, and match them to kind of the same individual and then the same household, which you really need to do to get your marketing right, as well as your kind of attribution right. Especially, if the average user has 1.86 email accounts, that means there's an awful lot of them out there that have 3, 4, 5, or 6 or more. Ultimately, the goal here is to have a complete profile of the buyer based on the data you have and the data you append, that you can build from and associate all the different activity and behaviors, and that you trust to be able to then feed into your machine learning and AI and other kind of segmentation approaches.
Yeah. Yep. And that identity now, right, is available in real time, right? With a single call API, you can acquire that new email address and say, all right, what name and postal we see associated with this?
Yep.
And do they agree? Or are there alternates? And again, let the machines and your data scientists do some work there to improve things.
But this is not a one-time thing. I think too often people sort of think about like, oh, okay, like I'll send you my database and you'll go and match it and clean it and send it back to me. And then you go, I'm done. Now I get to go work on other things. But that's not the way it works. As we all know, data decays, customers' lives change, all that kind of stuff. So we do need a continuous process.
Yeah, exactly. And right, the data decay, according to Forrester, a third of your data over the course of a year and 2 to 3% a month. And that's, roughly what we see too, again, across our clients. It obviously depends on the vertical and the nature of their data. Right. And because email is so prolific, there are constantly more addresses being created. Right. And so it's more opportunity for misaligned targeting. It's more potential for fraudulent activity. You have to have a plan in place to keep all this data straight. Right. And utilizing signals, both internal and external. How are your customers responding? What's working? What's not? Keep iterating. Right. What new value can you extract from the data? What new models can your team build? In the context of deliverability, it's really important. Right. Recycled spam traps. Yahoo is said to be a frequent user of this tactic. New pristine spam traps from Spamhaus can be treacherous and only takes a few. And to that end, AtData offers a list guard service, which is always on monitor of your email addresses or your email database. And our machines will be monitoring, right? They monitor the newly spun up disposable domains, make sure we know what's happening. The research team here can identify new traps, as we go on, and update those things in real time so that dangerous data isn't impacting your marketing performance. Okay, so I think that's our house, and we are on to our key takeaways. So first one, first-party data is extremely valuable. You need to invest in both the depth and quality of it, right? And as John presented at the Open, things have changed and quickly, right? We know the pandemic accelerated everything, and here we are. We have so much data, and we need strategies and governance and tools to ensure we are ingesting it and activating it to maximize its impact on the performance of our businesses. We believe the email address is a core component of digital identity and that it should be the focal point of your efforts. Second, seamless, right? Customer expectations for personalization and seamless experience requires email address intelligence to facilitate. So second screen, CTV, smartwatch, as we discussed, personalization, know my interests. Even better, know where I am in the buying journey. A broad email-centric signal network can enhance your data, your first-party data, and help you drive higher conversions and revenue. And then lastly, the risk and fraud, right? Bad actors rely on email to commit fraud, and email address intelligence provides the insights to mitigate their success. Right? So the bad actors, we know they're always staying one step ahead, but we know they rely on email address to commit fraud. right? So this email address intelligence is give you a broad view of that activity across a global network. So it's not just the data you see, it's the data we're seeing across the entire network. And again, we think this has the potential to save your business a lot of money. Right, so all said, we say, hey, let's look at your marketing technology stack. Right, what tools do you have in place, and where's the email address fit within that marketing technology stack? What opportunities are there for you to integrate email address intelligence and drive the growth of your business? That's what we have for you guys today. I think, Cynthia, we're ready to pass it over for some Q&A if we have any questions.
We do, Brian. Thanks so much. I will go to the first question from Ryan, and Ryan asks, as it relates to assessing the quality of an email address, what are the top 3 most important signals and indicators that you can use?
That is a good question. So top 3 important signals and indicators for you, I think, right? Recency is very important. What are you seeing around this email address? How recently have you seen it, or did you acquire it? And what is the context of that acquisition? 2, opens, right? What activity are we seeing it? And then 3rd, I'd say the data that you have, your first party data around past behaviors. As an abandoned cart, where did they get to the shopping cart? Where were they in their buying journey? John, anything to add to that?
Well, I think, implied behind the question, I sort of, got the impression that the person was asking, are there things that they can get just by looking at the email address, right? Mm-hmm. And the reality is, okay, maybe if there's an obvious typo, you can see that, which doesn't scale. You're not going to manually inspect each of these emails. So I think the real takeaway is the point Brian made, which is that, you do need to rely on a partner like @data, or somebody who can provide the intelligence, who has access to information about all of these emails to answer things like, how old is this email? Does it get opens from other people? Is it fraudulent or not? And it's really the signals you can get from the intelligence. You can't get that much just by actually inspecting the email address itself.
All right. Thank you both. Next question from Sean. Do you offer email validation and data appending services as a live on sign-up service, or is it a batch process?
Yes, both. You can have it either way. So with a single call on the @data API, you can validate an email address. You can apply a risk score to it. You can append a name and postal address to it for US data, demographic data, activity data. It's quite rich. And as well, that's available as batch too.
And I think the point that we sort of made earlier is and you kind of need both. Typically you'll start with the batch process to get everything clean, but don't stop there, right? Because, if you do that, it'll just become no good. And, a couple of months later, way more powerful to combine the batch with the real time.
Yeah.
All right. Next question. Actually, it's a 2-part question from Gabriel. Are lead software companies a waste of time, like in terms of quality of the data you are getting? Examples are ZoomInfo, H&B, Hooters, Apollo, and similar sources. That's the first part. And the second part, is @data a lead source to create lists for B2B?
John, B2B. What do you think?
So let's see where to start. There are, just in terms of acquiring email addresses, there are vendors out there, Demandbase one of them, that can just sell validated email address information, about you tell me a title and a company, and we can kind of return that kind of stuff. I think it's one of the things that's sort of, I think, really particularly interesting for B2B, though, is how can email address intelligence start to tie B2B email identities with the more personal consumer identity? Knowing that, if let's say you have my Demandbase email address in your system as a B2B company. Now, it could be I actually have a second account in there, because I signed up another time with my personal email address. Right. If you can't tie those into the same person, you're not going to have a complete view of me and my transaction history and my interests. But more importantly, let's say you do just have the B2B address, at demandbase.com, but you want to sort of put me into a Facebook custom audience or some other kind of advertising campaign. Facebook doesn't know my work address. So, you need the ability to sort of then have email intelligence to say this demand-based email ties to this person, John Miller, which ties to this personal address. And that's what you can then hash into Facebook for advertising. So these things can all work together.
Yep. And then the second part, AtData does not provide B2B lists, but we have partners who do. So feel free to reach out to us and we can point you in the right direction.
Excellent. Thank you. Next question from Melanie. How is the email intelligence data collected?
Okay. I'm trying to think about this from the outsider's view. I know too much about the inside of AtData. There's several databases that contribute to email address intelligence, and not just the database, obviously the software as well. For the most part, it's activity signals across our API network, right? So we're seeing 4 billion events a month on average related to an email address. As email addresses are presented to our API for various services or data that we acquire and other means. As well, the name postal email data is acquired. We're an aggregator, so it's compiled through third-party websites. It might be an example of a sweepstakes site or a publisher that's monetizing their data. I think those are the two main pieces. Obviously, there's a lot of proprietary data in there around validation and traps that is done by the research team here. Yeah, I think I covered both of them, but I feel like maybe I'm forgetting one. If I am, we'll follow up. Someone will call me on Teams.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you, Brian. Another question. Are there specific ways you've seen this intelligence being used to optimize marketing campaigns?
Yeah. John, you want to take that one? Or
I would just reiterate some of the points I made earlier. So why don't you take it?
Sure. I mean, the activity data is super powerful, right? So, a lot of times in the context of deliverability, our clients may have a deliverability consultant or maybe using a service to monitor their deliverability, and they say, well, your inbox placement at Gmail, we see a problem here, shelve your Gmail data. And right, there's competing views on that approach. Maybe they see an uptick in inbox placement, but at the same time, there's a demand for greater revenue through the email channel. So what are you to do, right? And that's the easy one for our activity data, our engagement score. Right, we can say, hey, this data is active elsewhere. Get after it, build it in, get back to engaging with that data. They might not be responding to you. Maybe they're not in market for your service right now, but in general, we believe that's a quick and easy way to onboard additional data, especially as we approach Q4 here and the shopping season. Now would be the time, right, to start working in that data, seeing how it behaves for you. And of course, you can test it and then roll it out against a broader database. So that's one. And then on the demographic side, we're big proponents of walk before you run, right? Sometimes we have know your customer efforts where people come in and say, I want all the fields, right? And that's great. But if your marketing is, your email marketing is not sophisticated yet, and you're not personalizing and segmenting yet, an easy way that John gave the gender example. I mean, that's an easy one. Age, gender, presence of children, income, marital status. These are good demographic, tried and true, where, right, just a tweak of the creative or maybe the call to action with the use of that data is another way to improve lift and your core metrics and leading to conversion rates.
All right. Thanks, Brian. One more question. We've had bad luck with appending in the past. How does this improve the likelihood of matching?
I mean, the bad luck with appending, yep. So when we work with our customers on appending, we're hands-on, right? We want to understand what do they understand about their database and their customers and the data they're acquiring, and how do they plan to use it? And let's talk through that, right? So the email experts here are going to pause and make sure you're well prepared to onboard that data into your platforms and have success with it. So, if you have had bad luck with the pending data in the past, we'd say, hey, maybe it's time to give it another try. And we'd love for you to try it with us. And we will definitely have, the people in place to make sure you're successful the next time around.
All right. Any final thoughts? Okay. Well, that is all the time that we have today. And to our audience, if we didn't get to your question, we will pass it along to @Data. Thanks again to our speakers for today's presentation. And thank you all for joining us today. Take care, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.